All right. So, welcome to our fourth webinar series of the academic year, Navigating Complexity from Explorers to Experts, featuring Mohammed Saqr. My name is Allie Holmes. I'm a doctoral candidate at Purdue University and the co-senior graduate student representative for Complexity Theories in Education, SIG. The purpose of the SIG is to apply, advance, and extend complexity theories to inquiry, research, theory, and practice in a variety of educational contexts. Today, we welcome Mohammed Saqr. Saqr is an associate professor of computer science at the School of Computing, University of Eastern Finland. Saqr has a PhD in learning analytics from Stockholm University, followed by a postdoctoral position at the University Paris City, France. His scholarship work is diverse and interdisciplinary. He has received several international research awards. Additionally, Saqr has received the Europe Emerging Scholar in Learning Analytics. Saqr serves on the editorial board for several academic journals. His current work focuses on complexity, individual differences, and advancing solutions for precision artificial intelligence. You can read more about his work on his personal website, which is now in the chat, or read his latest open access methodological book, Learning Analytics Methods and Tutorials, a Practical Guide Using R, which is also now in the chat. Dr. Saqr will deliver his presentation, and there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Saqr as he discusses capturing where learning occurs, idiographic and person-specific learning processes.
Okay, thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm really more than honored to be with all of you, and thanks everyone who's attending. I'm really appreciating that too. I was told that we can have questions during the presentation. Can we? Yeah, so please feel free to stop me whenever you want. I will try to respond. I can't promise anything. But yeah, let me try to share my screen, and this presentation usually goes more than... Okay, Safari is doing bad things. I will share in a second. Okay, so feel free to stop me whenever you want. I will try to make the presentation a little bit not very technical. It will go technical anyway, so stop me whenever you want, and I will try to make things more understandable. My presentation today is about idiographic learning analytics, or capturing person-specific and idiographic processes. I will explain what that means ahead. But let's go a little bit. Yeah, I've been introduced already. So my presentation will have an introduction with some historical background, some stories from the history of science and practice, and then I will discuss the problem. We'll give some many examples. I will give another glimpse of my research on the topic, and really very short conclusion. So researchers have been really fascinated by the idea of understanding and predicting students' performance. And that is not really something new at all. Over 100 years ago, maybe more than a century, you can see this paper, Predicting Performance in Chemistry. And they have had the same ideas. Let's get some predictors or variables. Let's put them in a regression model or a predictive model and try to predict students' performance. And we've been trying ever since, and we couldn't. Almost 15 years ago, McFadden and Dawson did a really nice paper mining learning management system data to develop an early warning system. The same idea that we keep getting in, and the whole idea that, okay.
When we go, this is A1 level.
Okay, yeah. So they can get the mine learning management system data, put them in a predictive algorithm, and predict student performance. While the idea looks really good, when we try to take these predictors and apply them to other students in other courses, this study, for example, by Rihanna Konyan, uh, found that in every course it had its own predictors, it had its own variables, and nothing generalizes to any other course. Sometimes these variables predict performance in that course, and sometimes they don't at all. Sometimes they are in positive, and sometimes they are in negative. We did also the same. We did a really big meta-analysis in a single study, and then this is what we found. Even in the same exact course with very similar students who come from a very homogeneous background and in a very homogeneous program, you can see that a predictor like frequency of students click sometimes very predictive and sometimes even negative. You can see the active days, for example, does the same thing. Sometimes it's predictive, sometimes it's not. And you can go like this. It's a really long meta-analysis. And the whole idea is, if what we find about students or what we get in our studies do not generalize to the future, then what we do? But it's not really only about education. It's about everything. A very famous study, very well known, called Open Science Collaboration. It has been really done several times after, that found that if you look here, the p-values of the studies that they tried to replicate and reproduce the results was almost very, very small. But in the replications, you can see that the p-values ranged from almost 1 to, yeah, they replicated very small amount of papers. If you look at the effect sizes, the effect sizes were also the same. In the replication, the effect sizes were really low, and almost many of them were around the 0. But in the original studies, the effect sizes were high. So what we found in the past, we couldn't replicate it, and we can't really depend on this to build our insights. This open science collaboration or these large replications have been replicated so many times. One of the very famous studies, another study that tried to reproduce studies in very high rated psychological journals, because they said, you know what, maybe these replications didn't work because the other journals were not really good, or maybe the other paper that they tried to replicate were not very good. So let's look at journals that are really rigorous in accepting papers. And yeah, as you can see, all these empty circles, they are non-replicating studies. So we really have a replicability problem. Okay, so we have a replicability problem when we use the past or the past findings. We don't replicate them. We can't replicate them really well, and they don't apply or generalize well in other people. So why the problem? So I will go now through 3 stories before moving forward. Okay, the first story is about Sir Francis Galton, and this guy is a cousin of Charles Darwin himself. He made a very large guessing competition at the West of England stock market. We asked people who are experts, butchers and animal traders and such thing, to give a guess about the weight of the ox. And he published the results in Nature. He asked these 800 people and collected all the results from everyone. What was very interesting is that using the 800 people who was able to get the exact weight of the ox, his conclusion is that using the wisdom of the crowds, which translate to vox populi, we can, the average or the aggregate of the wisdom of the crowds can tell us some really interesting things, like, yeah, get to the weight of the ox. The actual weight was 1,200, and people guess it 1,197 after removing the random errors. But the most interesting thing from his data is that although our conclusion said that the aggregate of the population can predict the ox weight, not a single person was able to guess it right. But the average, or the actually he chooses the median for that. So his conclusion was the wisdom of the crowd is great, and ever since we really like such concept, although not a single person did that right. Another experiment called Norma. In the 30s, they were searching for the normal woman or the perfect woman. How to do that? They measured the sizes or the measurement of 15,000 women between 21 and 25. And you would guess what kind of woman they choose at this time. And they compiled all of this measurement and created the perfect average woman from all these measurements. And then after they created this average perfect woman, they started to search for the actual woman who fits these parameters. And then that context extended, and 3,700 women applied to this context to match the actual woman. And you can see now Martha Skidmore, who won that context, and how she compares to the perfect Norma. She's not really matching that size. So what did they do? They said that this is a great example and this is a great experiment. And ever since, they used this normal size as the medium size for women. And ever since, women are suffering from this very non-fitting sizes because they were actually modeled after this average sizes. Any questions so far? I can stop if you want and respond. Okay, I will continue. The last example is really the most interesting. Late in the 40s, US Air Force was facing a problem. The problem is planes were kind of crashing without an obvious reason. After some investigation, they said, you know what, the cockpit was designed in 1926. And since it was designed that very long ago, possibly the changes or the sizes of the Americans have changed. So they asked the guys, the pilots, what happened. They said at some point we were not really able to move well in the cockpit and we couldn't control the plane, and then it crashed. So they asked Gilbert Daniels to study the problem. What will he do? He will simply measure many pilots and get the average pilot. It's a well-tested uh, concept already. He measured around 4,000 pilots on 140 dimensions of size, including thumb length, crotch height, distance from pilot's eyes to ears, and every single measure you could imagine to get the average one. After reaching this averages, he tried to actually see how many people within his sample fits this average. He never found anyone. And then he said, okay, let's see how many of these people fits on 10 dimensions. He didn't. And then he lowered down his requirements and said, okay, let's only choose 3 measurements and see how many people will fit them. And he was able to find only 3.5% of the entire sample will fit within 3 or fit 3 measurements of these average things. What Gilbert really concluded of that work is that the average is not really something obtainable or attainable. And he designed adaptive cockpits. And by these adaptive cockpits, you can advance or move things around in the cockpit. So it's not only one size fits all, but that the sizes itself adapts to different sizes of people. And ever since, adaptive design has started to take off. Because the normal thing was not really the usual conclusion that we could come up, but adaptive one. And he admitted that we will not be ever able to get this aggregate average one. Okay, so we conclude from that this average is hard to find, but when we do research, we collect lots of data to establish a norm or an average or an aggregate normal that we call it to represent the state of affairs. And by that, we would like, or we think, like a typical student will behave in that way in that situation. That's a very well summarizing principle that really helps us kind of summarize what we get from the data. But the problem is there is no such thing as average. If you look at the normal distribution, you will find many people here, many people here, many people there. So we are on that line somewhere, and that average is hardly attainable. We could be applying some results based on this about for a person who is here or a person who is here. And this kind of extremes or this kind of people will be definitely not affected in a good way. By that, I would like to say that we are heterogeneous. We have different ways of behavior, different ways of cognition, different mixtures and groupings of everything. This is a very nice example of how or why our results do not really reflect or do not really replicate. Let's see this one. If we have a sample like this sample, and we just capture some of the results or some of the sample, as you can see here. I don't know if you see my mouse. We get an effect size of 0.33. But if we take another part of the sample, we get another effect size. And if we take another part of the sample, we get a different effect size. This time is in negative. It is because we are mixing things. And if we take the full sample, which is not very realistic, if we take the whole population, we get the usual one. So our results reflects where we get from the data, where we cut from the data, our part that we get or sample from. Of course, in an ideal scenario, we possibly could sample very randomly from everyone. And this is a very interesting study. In it, the researchers were found that they were able to mispredict subgroup of people each and every time they applied their models to. There were around 5 to 10% of their population who defied all of their predictive models. And although the results varied of what they can predict, the mispredictable people were the most predictable results of their experiment. So each and every time they were kind of to get people in and out and predict them. But some of the group or the group that they were trying to predict, each and every time and each and every data set, they were mispredicted. They concluded that there are some people, some subgroup of the population who are impossible to predict by relying on others' data. Why? Because we are simply complex. If you look at this example, and this example reflects IQ, if you can say, for example, that this lady is maybe average on vocabulary and this is low, both of their scores is 107 to start with. But you can find that this 107, this summary of their IQ, is composed of different mixtures of different qualities of different things. Somebody is really good at vocabulary, somebody good in knowledge, somebody good in visual puzzles, someone is better in number memory. And that's what makes us humans after all. We are really different. Any questions so far? Any questions? I would be happy to take a question now if you have any questions for me. Okay, so I will continue. So we established that we are heterogeneous, we are different. Learning from about others doesn't really reflect us. But the whole rationale that our research paradigms is built on is that learning about others inform us about me or about us. In another way, what we say is gathering many data points about many people can simply reflect the many situations that I will be in. I will make a very naive, simple example. If I will capture 1,000 people in a stadium, for example, and see what are they wearing, all of them, I will get an idea about 1,000 days of the way I will dress, because I don't really need to to record the way I dress in 1,000 days. It's easier to get 1,000 people once, and that's by capturing many people, we are able to reflect or to get the variations or the situation that a person will be in. And for example, if we have 1,000 people, the variations of the situation that happened in the person 1,000 times. In another way, the inter-individual differences or variance will reflect the intra-individual differences. This is our hypothesis, because how we study many people, because they will reflect with their diversity, the diversity of what happens within the same individual. This is the whole foundation of our scientific rationale. Is it true or not? That's what we will try to say now. We will try to look at it from foundational point of view and also from empirical point of view. Let's go. So first of all, empirically, there are lots of papers about that. One of the most famous one is one by Aaron Fisher and his group, and they studied several constructs, and they found that the group-based, what happens among many people, has very different distribution. This red, or I don't know, this dark color, and this light brown, blue color. Depressed mode and anhedonia, depressed mode and worry, fear and avoidance. What happens inter-individually is different, or the distribution is very different than intra-individual one. So empirically, they do not match. Our theory does not really reflect what we think of. The whole even title of the paper, it says lack of group to individual generalizability is a threat to human subject research. And the paper is published in Proceedings of National Academy of Science with that very strong title. It simply said that, yeah, using group-based methods or using inter-individual differences is not really reflective, or cannot really reflect within human processes. Why? Let's look at the foundation. There are two conditions need to be met for this to happen. First, we call it ergodicity, and the second, we call it stationarity. Let me try to explain. Ergodicity simply means that we are very similar, and it doesn't matter whom we put in the same sample, because we are very similar anyway. We function in the same way, we react in the same way, we deal with things in the same way. So yeah, if you put A or B or C or D, it's just that we are exchangeable. Of course, we know this is not really true, and we have significant differences. The second one is that we are stationary. Stationary means we don't change over time. Our processes do not change over time. What I do now, for example, how I perceive things, how I deal with things, my behavior, my cognition, my learning processes, it's the same now, like next month, the month after. They are stationary anyway. But of course, we know that this is not really true. All human psychological processes differ according to time. So this is again another condition that is not met, that does make relying on data collected from different people generalized to a single person or individuals. And the third is something that, yeah, the way we understand these aggregate conclusions and how we generalize them may sometimes lead to something we call ecological fallacy. Ecological fallacy means that what we think when we get, for example, that the mean, for example, or the ox experiment, that people were able to guess the ox weight correctly, that we think everybody has guessed it correctly. That is exactly it. When we, for example, say that homework improves students' performance, that we think that everyone in the data set or every student in the classroom will benefit from homework. But this is not really the case. Let's take an example here I made myself. Here is an example. We have 5 students in a classroom, and we applied some intervention. As we can see, the mean, which is the dotted black line, we see improvement over time. So our class has improved. But if we looked at each and every individual, this is the average one. If we looked at every individual, we see that 3 students has improved, has worsened, and 2 students only has improved. So thinking that the mean reflects the actual improvement or an actual result or reflect everyone is also problematic, relying on these averages, that averages represent everyone. In this exact one, we can see that we have already bad results. Okay, let me give a simple example of how, if in this example, we looked at a very random data set, and for a study made in a German university, where we picked 2 variables. The variable was happiness and task value. And what we did is we did normal group-based, or what we call variable center approach, where we computed a regression model between the value of the task and if students are happy when they are doing a task that they like or not. And then we looked at something we call it person-centered, and person-centered is we try to look if there are some heterogeneity in the data, if there are some students who do not conform to the average that we measured before. This is the usual approach. And in this one, we try to look using some statistics to look if some people in the data did not really conform to our conclusions. And then in the third one, we did person-specific or idiographic. Idiographic means if we have enough data for every student, we can have a different regression model for every student. Let's see. So we found that students really, when they are value the task, they are happy, they feel good, and they feel good about it. It's really very simple and straightforward. But when we fit a mixture regression model, we found that the subgroup of students who do not feel very happy when they are studying or working on a task they like. Of course, we have not much more information about the data, but what we thought, or this taking these conclusions at face value, or that represents everyone, was really not very good at all, because we found that some students are actually, when they are working on a task they like, they are not happy. So this generalizing or aggregating brings the wrong conclusion. The idiographic approach is a bit more granular, in that we go down to the resolution of single individuals. Here we look at some students. Every line of this is a one single student. They were 100, so we cut some of them. As you can see here, it's negative, 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 and at the end we see positive, positive, positive. So rather than relying on generalizable or generalized results from an aggregate average, we may, if we have enough data, get the exact representation or the exact relationship between happiness and task value in that exact student. Or, for example, homework and a student's outcome in that exact student. If we, for example, applied or asked the student to do homework and measure their outcome 50, 60, 40 times, then we can get data about that exact student. Of course, when you collect that much data from that single student, it really is not an easy process if you collect this much data this much time, many times. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Please.
Not to go into too much detail, but just very like a high level. How did you find the I don't know what to call them, clusters, types?
The cluster is the mixture regression model. There are some regression models that comes with mixture model in them, something like cluster in them. So it's a cluster regression. So the statistic model itself try to find heterogeneity or some subtype of the data based on their different relationship between the predictors and the outcome. It's really very simple. We already have a book coming soon, which the preprint of it online, and we replicated that whole study on there. So you can see the data, that exact data. You can see the code. You can see the model. And I can definitely, by the end of this conversation or talk, send or share a link to replicating that whole study. And the data is actually, as I said before, the data is public online. So you can do the whole thing. Thank you for the question. Any more questions? Okay. Any more questions? No? Okay, so we now know that there are three ways of doing things. First is we get the aggregate of everyone. Second, we can look at clusters within the data that have different relationships between the outcome and the predictor. And it's not really difficult at all. It's just a very, very straightforward regression model. Or you can study everyone. That's a very costly one, but the middle solution is not really difficult at all. Okay. And we saw that we have three types of people. And we also saw that this type, or studying every single person on their own, reflects the solution in the middle somehow. We have some people positive, some people negative. Of course, we have people here with p-value of non-statistically significant, so it didn't make difference to them. And that's what you get when you get to higher resolution. Okay, so the next one is my Finnish Research Council funded project in which I collect ecological momentary assessment data. I ask students questions regarding their self-regulation on daily basis. I collected this data 3 times a day during classrooms and in the morning and at home. I ended up not using the morning data because I didn't ask them so many questions in the morning, like, how are you doing during your studies? Because they just woke up. So that was the reason. There were 40 days, almost a semester, because, working days, almost a little bit less than a semester. And I had almost 120 students joined, completed almost 70 something, 40, 50 with lots of missing data were excluded. And we also collected data from their phones, almost 1 million time points and 4,000 ecological momentary assessment data. Nevertheless, these are the variables. If you look at them, and yeah, for example, how do you like my mouse? The environment around you, if you are evaluating yourself, listening to feedback, have control over the environment, seeking help, anxious, enjoying, and this kind of variable. We did a very long and exhaustive literature review to summarize most self-regulated learning questionnaires. And of course, if we look at them like that, it's not really very well telling because these variables interact with each other. And let's come to the complex system here. So the usual way is that we fit a regression model, for example, A plus B plus C plus D, and we predict something. But when we do that in a regression model, we need to say that these variables essentially do not affect each other or should not be multilinear or collinear. But we know already that, for example, if a person is having problems or having troubles at school, they seek help. We know that these kind of variables all affect each other. And this is how or what complex systems are. So complex systems assume that these variables interact with each other, affect each other, and across times and across also spaces and across conditions and across also contexts. And these interactions, for example, at time point 1 may be different at time point 2, maybe different at time point 3. So we took a complex system approach, and by that we fitted the network, and we fitted the networks to each and every single person's data. As you can see here, we got variations enough from every student, almost 80 time points, and we estimated a multi-level vector autoregression, which is simply a regression model represented as a network. And this network is also dynamic, so we can understand what happens now, predicts the future events using a network approach. I'm not sure if this is easy or not, but the network makes it much easier. And then we created, since we have data enough, we created a network for each and every student. By that, we don't have to generalize. The paper is there, mapping the self and self-regulation. You can see the general picture, but we are here looking at every single student. And if you look, for example, at this student, when she is enjoying, or he, I don't remember, I don't really know even, that, yeah, an anxiety, a red line means negatively correlated with enjoyment. And anxiety is negatively correlated with motivation. For example, we see goals here is positively correlated with regulation. Regulation is positively correlated with motivation. In that other student, there is no correlation between an anxiety and motivation. So that student doesn't really matter to them. We also see, for example, that here, with that student, goals are negatively correlated with regulation. They don't happen together. Here they are strongly correlated. In that student, student number 3, an anxiety is even positive. When the student is anxious or they are evaluating themselves, they are also anxious and they also motivated a little bit. And their enjoyment is related to their motivation. We also see that regulation is not related to anything. So we see here really three different students who have 3 different personas, profiles, whatever you call them. And if we look at the general picture, none of them actually fits the general picture. But this is a way of studying their complex way of self-regulating. There is something called centrality measures, which will look at the most important variables in simple ways. And you can see below, this is the average picture of everyone. And we can also see that every student has their own curve of centralities. For the student who is green, student number 5, we see enjoyment is really the most central. That's not at all the same for student number 1. Student number 1, actually environment, when he is feeling loved and belonging and happy with his school environment, or she, this is the most effective or most important variable to them. Also the same with help or regulation. So we see the differences here. And here, of course, since we are looking at single students, we can understand that single student, but the drawback is that we cannot generalize this to anyone. This is very specific to that person, with absolutely zero possibility of generalization to other persons. Any questions? I'm happy taking a question here. Any question? Okay, I'm possibly already crossing my time. Okay, I will try to finish fast. This is a study that I really, really like. In that study, we fitted regression. We fitted machine learning models to predict students' self-regulation. Specifically, we try to predict students' effort. Why didn't we predict grades? Because you can't measure student grades 2 to 3 times a day. You can't have this assessment 3 times a day. Even some days, students do not really get to study something new so that, or you can really examine them. So we looked at what could be predicted. We predicted metacognition, we predicted effort, and we predicted also motivation. I will focus on predicting effort here. And these were our results. We found, for example, that R square, if you look at the curves, for example, random forest curve, we see that among our students, the predictors or her own predictors were able to explain her behavior by 0%, and some of them was almost 100%. And the averages was 0.45. And that confirms the study that I showed earlier, that some students are really unpredictable. They don't conform to our norms. They're really very far away from it. And some are very close to it. It would be very unfair to apply some results of a predictive model of students whom the predictors at all do not in any way predict him or her. We found the same in every variable we try to predict, whether it has been effort or metacognition or motivation. Motivation was the most predictable as far as I remember, and metacognition was the least. The most interesting result, and possibly the most shocking results I've ever found in my life, that among the 17 students, not 2 students shared the top 5 predictors, not 2 shared them. So yeah, even the premise that most people tend to have similar predictors of the same thing didn't even happen. And if you go forward, it's only when you pass the second, third most important variable, you find people completely different from everywhere. And even the most striking was that not a single student shared the top 5 predictors with the average model. This is the average model, and this is the top 5 ones: planning, help, enjoyment, metacognition, and anxiety. Not a single student had the same order. Whether the order by vote or by quantitative counting or by any model, we did everything to try to find 2 similar ones. We couldn't. Again, what it says is that the aggregation across many people is not really telling us a very good picture. Yeah, I will skip this one. And then in the next experiment, do I have 5 minutes more or shall I conclude?
Oh, you can keep going.
Yeah, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And the second one, we try to predict learning gain. Of course, learning gain is a very big concept, and I know that there are very, very, very great psychologists listening now, so I wouldn't go further. We asked the students how much learning you have gained and new knowledge and such today, because we cannot really assess them 3 times a day. That was a little bit of a compromise. And we try to use more predictable these times. What lecture they are attending, the environment around them. We try to get data from their phones and sensors, and we got almost 30-something predictors. Plus the ecological momentary assessment that we also measured, that self-reported. The multimodal data or the sensor data, like their steps, their frequent screen usages to capture their attention or their lack thereof, the duration they have been, their sleep, has it been regular or not. And also we captured their classroom, that we measured this through during or what they were studying and such things. 30-something predictors, and the results. Now we can we predict if students will learn or not? And this is really very interesting. This is still not a published study. We found that when we use the model, when we learned about the student using his or her own data, if we use cross-validation, we can predict, or this data explain the student's behavior when R-square of 0.7, which means learning about a student using his own or her own data can generalize in 70% of the time if we get to the same situations. But when we put this data or new data that the model hasn't seen, this explanation dropped to 0.26. So even using the student's own data and exposing it to new data, we're not able to predict the same student with that much predictability as we think. It is just like what somebody wrote once about weather and climate. In Finland here, we have really very cold weather. Last year, in January, the temperature was around -20, 30, -40. But this year in January, we have seen days that were +1, which is extreme, really extreme. So yeah, we know that the average temperature in Finland will be during winter will be -5, -7. That's absolutely sure. The deviation of this will be very, very small. But on any single day, it may range from -30, -40 to +1. And this is again a different time scale. What I try to say by this is that generalizing the general norms to single individual students or to moments is not as straightforward as we think. I will skip all of these, but only this is my last slide. These are the means of a student's data. And if you, for example, see self-efficacy here, you can see that the mean of the self-efficacy of the same, the mean, the mean is the central tendency. By definition, it should be stable. And we have aggregated already 80 measurement points, so they shouldn't be really very spread. But you can see that every variables, the means of the means, are spread big time across students, as you can see here. Technically or theoretically, they should be almost all of them around the mean, because we have already collected many data points from the same students to capture the diversity of behavior that student might exhibit, which by theory should conform to the average if we collect it from so many other people. So I will simply skip. This is the last part of the slide. I asked some of the students what do they think about our models about them. So there was no obligation for the students to respond. So I got 2 or 3 responses from them. I will read them to you. The student says, this certainly seems mostly correct when I feel most motivated to complete a task. If I enjoy it, that's the most important things to me, rather than achieving something through the task. Value is also very important to me. If I feel like there is no point for the task that I'm doing, I will not feel motivated. And she goes on and on, or he. Another one, the first paragraph represents well my mindset of planning and doing things I enjoy. The very strong link between enjoyment, efficacy, and performance is very true. My motivation for things often leads to planning and somehow squishing the light activity into my schedule. I'm surprised that in the first graph, my anxiety is not linked with planning. I'm always planning even small things in advance and get anxious if something goes not according to my plan. I also get anxious if I, for some reason, don't follow my plan. For example, I'm too tired to get work done. Of course, there are two different graphs here, and anxiety as predictive of the future or predictive of what's happening now. Anyway, so my conclusion, it's all based on what we want to see. If we would like to see us as one collective that we can aggregate and summarize in just one central tendency value, or we look at that we are diverse and can be accepted as having different qualities or completely different people, or at least have individual differences, each and every one of us, that should be considered. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'd like to open the floor up for a few questions.
I have a question. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for this wonderful presentation. And your research is really very, very exciting and robust. And you collect so much different types of data. And I think your work is the most powerful to demonstrate the point you're making, which is that there's a big issue with unit of analysis in social science research, that the default of aggregation is misleading us to interpret phenomena wrongly when we apply this to individuals, and that we should really focus on is the matching the theoretical unit of analysis to our empirical unit of analysis and to our assumptions about the phenomenon and how it manifests, whether it's dynamic, whether it's stable, etc. One challenge that I would like to ask you how you are confronting it is that we get as well when we saw similar data, of course, not in the same extent to you that you are showing. But if everybody is unique, then what are we saying? And part of what, and that is related to another approach in complex dynamic system research, which is seeking patterns. So, for example, research that uses complex modeling to identify catastrophe phase transitions in systems, to look for patterns of where is the phase transition of the system, and looking for patterns. But right now, my feeling and goes along with your data is that at the stage where we are at in researching psychological systems, at least using quantitative self-report data, we are at the point where we can just right now point to say what we have been doing doesn't work. We need to develop a different approach to saying something general, theoretically beyond every individual is unique. How would you answer the question of what is it that we're saying that is constructive to educators, to policymakers, about the state of our understanding of complex dynamic systems in psychological and educational contexts?
Thank you so much, Avi, for attending today. It's really an honor, and I need to say something. When I published the paper in Learning Individual Differences, Avi sent me a very a very warm and very nice and very encouraging email that really was one of the best emails I've ever received. It was, yeah. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for attending today. And again, thank you for the very tough questions, which is, yeah, the whole idea is there is definitely a tough question of if we say that everyone is different, and we also have data. I myself do research that uses generalizable model and such. So how can we reconcile both? I think it's the humility of that our results and our data applies to some people or many people or to most people, and does not apply to others. And we shouldn't enforce our solutions in a way like dictating things. I give example. For example, if you go to a restaurant, there's always a menu and everyone chooses something, and that's how restaurants work. They know that we are different. Our tastes and ways of doing things are different, so they give you a menu. Some other restaurants may sometimes, for example, like burger one, they have one type of food or something. So in our general life, we understand and we apply differences in really big ways, in really big, even in the coffee itself, although it's just coffee. Do you like it with black? Do you like it dark? Do you like it with milk? Do you like it with whatever? There's so many variations of how people consume coffee, and we admit and acknowledge and endorse variations, even in something simple like coffee. But when we apply things in the classroom or some other places, we take things like, of course, I'm not generalizing too. I'm just saying that the extreme example that we think that everything will apply to everyone. Many maybe not know that I really started my life as a physician, and one of the most striking things that I have learned is that every non-effective drug that doesn't get an FDA approval has been actually effective in 30-40% of the people. So it is not like it's 0% effective. It's just not effective enough to cross a threshold to be helpful for many people. But there are a minority that even useless drugs still work in them. And also the best drug in the world still work in 60, 70, 50% of the people, unless it's insulin or something. So yeah, I think it's the way we even look at our general results, that they might benefit most people, that might be, or many people, but also they might not work with others. So if we start to see that things are not working or some different student, we need to look in a different way. I think many teachers, for example, especially the teachers who are in I don't know, education is very different in many countries, but some teachers are teaching the same classroom 5-6 hours a day, and the teacher will know really well each and every student. How can she or he talks to them, how she can address them, what works with X doesn't work with Y. There is not a single message. So internally as humans, I think we really understand these individual differences. We adjust all the time to that. But I don't know what happens to us when we look at research and we get with these strong statements that things will work everywhere all the time. You get what I mean?
I do, and I think that this is like a serious mind shift that we need as researchers and as policymakers, people who make decisions of a lot of people, and we need to reconcile efficiency with understanding that individuals are unique. But I think also that our task as researchers is to develop theories that reconcile both, that we look for general patterns while reconciling the fact that each individual is special. So creating theories of the landscape of possibilities and still devise principles for the way systems behave, even if each individual in the landscape has a different, the system looks differently, like you demonstrate so beautifully in your work.
Thank you so much.
I have a comment and
Please.
a question, if I may.
Please.
First of all, several comments. First of all, thank you very much. That was clearly presented and very easy to follow. I'm an applied linguist, and just to complement your data, I want to complement with an E. I want to mention that some of my own work, published work, and others of my colleagues who are applied linguists show the same kind of patterns, not with self-report data, but with actual objective data like syntactic complexity or vocabulary complexity over time in the developing interlanguage of language learners. So there you can actually count, without self-report, just looking at at what they're producing, and we see the same thing. I mean, my graphs would mirror yours completely in terms of individual differences over time, the intra and the inter. So that's the second comment, I guess. The first one was thank you, and very nicely done. The second one is I have the objective data as opposed to self-report, if I may call it that, that mirrors yours. A comment, and it's, I guess, or a question, it's more of something that I've been holding on to for a long time. I mean, of course, the policy makers and funders are going to look for what can they get that attends to the largest group as possible. I mean, it's a question of economics. But if we
Yes.
can't deliver that, it's being dishonest to suggest we can, I think. A report a long time ago that, as I say, I've held on to, had to do with and your idea about the hamburger just reminded me of it, had to do with giving students choice. That is, it was a study done in Montreal, and there were a number of different classes, and some of them focused on rules, some of them focused on more communication methods of learning. These are methods of teaching. And the students were asked to self-select which class they wanted to take. And not surprisingly, I think they did much better when their selection and their own disposition matched. It almost makes me think that, we should turn to the students and say, what is it that you want, as opposed to trying to prescribe it from generalizable data that we know does not work. So what about asking the students? And again, as Avi was just saying, the teachers know this. Teachers are always talking about individual differences among students. But what if we turn it over to the students and say, okay, and you'd have to describe, what is it that's going on in this classroom that's different from another classroom? And the teachers would obviously have to be trained or self-selected as to the way in which they would approach the subject matter. But given all that, what about matching the student with the kind of classroom that he or she, kind of instruction that he or she thinks would serve them best? Thank you. I'll stop now.
Thank you so much, Diane. Really, really very good, very instructive example. One of the things that I've sometimes also learned, when the smartphone start to appear, this kind of keyboards that you have to log in to use them, and the login learns your spelling mistakes and learns also what you do and corrects them. And they exactly do the same thing. So, for example, if they know sometimes I use an Arabic words in my text and they learned it and they don't correct it anymore. And of course, every person have their own syntax, have their own even spellings. Sometimes it even corrects and to me to ABC because I'm sometimes make it wrong. So it even learns the wrong thing about me. And that is absolutely idiographic. And it has been there ever, I don't know, 15 years or something. This keyboards that learns from your own and suggests to you from your own data that she learns about your typing style. It is, yeah, of course, it is very similar to the example you gave. So, yeah, I mean, there are so many things idiographic and they work really perfectly and they are palpable everywhere.
What about the suggestion, though, that we turn it to the students to have them self-select? It seems to be they that then are then, invested in the outcome at the very least.
Well, I really hope that schools have much diversity for classrooms. I think, for example, my young daughter has a classroom of around 8, 9 students in our class, and it's only one class. So there are not many options. There is a guy there who bullies her sometimes, and it's just you can imagine 1 out of 8 is a bully. Is a big is a big number already. So they cannot move anywhere. I mean, of course, if that's something that people can do, it's not affordable across many classrooms and many schools, where the options are really limited.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saqr. That was a wonderful talk, and it was so enlightening. And your work is directly related to so many existential questions that we've been stumbling upon in our studies. And it makes me even question the validity of the literature reviews that we are basing our research questions and research studies on, because they rely on lots of generalized studies and information. Thank you so much for your presentation today, and I will hand it to you, Ali, right now.
Yes, once again, thank you. So we do have a quick few SIG updates. Our next webinar series will feature Dr. Emanuel. We'll be discussing secular dynamics of advanced networks towards neo-structural theory and collective learning as complex social processes. you can register in the link that was in the chat. Also, the SIG is seeking applications for our next junior graduate student representative. Applications are due Friday, May 2nd. If anyone is interested, please let us know. They can reach out to Hyundai or myself to learn more, or if you know of a graduate student who might be good for the position, please encourage them to apply. And we would like to take a moment to remind you to renew your membership for AERA and the Complexity SIG to continue to enjoy the exclusive perks and stay in the loop with our latest activities and events. And lastly, please follow us on our social media channels. And thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.